Now for our next interview, we've invited FranklinCovey's Chief People Officer and two-time Wall Street Journal best-selling author, Todd Davis. Todd, welcome back to On Leadership.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be here.
Hey, Todd, like all of our guests in this multi-part interview, you have plenty of things to be doing because as our Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer, you got a few things going on when it comes across the 50-plus offices FranklinCovey has around the world. Todd, we spoke earlier today with Joanna from JetBlue, and she, at my request, was quite tactical around the processes, strategies, systems that JetBlue is undertaking to re-enter their workforce back into their buildings. Of course, they never stopped. As an airline, they've been on the front lines from day one. Today, I'd like to have your conversation with our listeners and viewers focus a little more on sort of some of the leadership strategies, the culture that FranklinCovey is focused on to maintain our momentum as it relates to not just our employees, but also to our work with our clients as well. Todd, would you reorient some of our listeners to kind of the years you've been with the company and some of the few roles that you've had that have led up to you now being our own Chief People Officer?
You bet. Thank you, Scott. So I've been with FranklinCovey going on 25 years now. It's been a great and continues to be a great ride, so to speak. I had previously worked in the medical industry for many years, and then came on at what was then called the Covey Leadership Center, heading up their recruitment department. Then for several years, I moved into our innovations department where I helped and was privileged to help develop some of our great flagship offerings. And then for the past nearly 16 years have served as an Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer at the company.
As I mentioned, you're also a two-time best-selling author, so you've been on the road a lot the last 4 or 5 years, keynoting around the world. You're probably liking a bit of the break from having 3 jobs versus just 2 right now.
Yeah, the hold on travel has been a blessing for some of us.
It's true.
I've had great experiences here at FranklinCovey.
Yeah, I'll bet there are some marriages that are suffering as a result of their spouses not being out on the road as well. I think a lot of us look forward to kind of getting back into our routine, hopefully sooner than later. Todd, let's talk about your engagement level with FranklinCovey's formal leaders, our general managers, vice presidents, directors, people who are people leaders inside the organization. As you look back at, say, the last 2.5 months, 10, 11 weeks, what have been the biggest challenges that otherwise very competent people leaders have been facing, perhaps with their own mindsets and with those of those working for them?
Great question. I think it's important for all of us to remember that leaders, which we're all in, you and I are in leadership roles, and the leaders that I work with are also human beings. They also have their worries, their concerns about their financial situation, their children who are now home from school, or their aging parents. So I think first and foremost, it's important to remember, and I try and remember as I work with and coach these leaders and others, that they're also human beings in addition to being a leader. And as I like to say a lot, meet them where they are and recognize that first, recognize them first as a person. And then let's talk about what their roles and duties are and the important things they need to be doing as a leader in our organization.
Todd, you and I both know from myself, having almost been here for 25 years myself, we have an extraordinary cadre of leaders at the FranklinCovey Company, which you would expect, right? This is our expertise, and we invest heavily in developing the leadership capabilities of our own people. Look at that group. What are the best of the best doing? The most effective leaders at FranklinCovey, and for that matter, any organization, what are they doing? What are they saying? How are they behaving differently that other leaders might choose to adopt some of those same things to rise to that level?
Yeah, I love that because I can think of numerous examples. They are connecting on a human level. They've always been great at holding, frequent one-on-ones, as we talk about, is important for any leader to do, to connect with your people. But they are realizing the importance of connection now more than ever before. I mentioned I was in the medical industry many years ago before joining FranklinCovey, and there were several studies back then, and they continue to be now, about bedside manner. And the equation with those physicians who have great bedside manner, much lower malpractice situations and lawsuits going on. And so I'm not suggesting, well, be kind to people and then they won't sue you, but I am suggesting that the data shows the more we can connect on the human level, the more we can let people know we care about you. We are interested in you, not just what you can do for us as an organization, if I'm your leader, but how are you doing? Then we enhance that relationship so there aren't as many stresses and maybe combative situations as there might be otherwise. So those best leaders you asked me about, they're recognizing the importance of maybe upping or increasing the frequency of their one-on-ones and maybe changing the format of those one-on-ones to spend a good chunk of time up front saying, how's everything going? How's your daughter doing? Or you mentioned last time that your mother was worried about this. What's going on there? And just having someone to listen to you is not a soft skill that's not important. It's critical at this time when people are feeling so anxious and so disconnected. So that's the first thing that our greatest leaders are doing.
Todd, expand to the role that a leader plays in communication. When I was interviewing Joanna from JetBlue, she talked about her idea that leaders really can't over-communicate. And I'll tell you, I was wrestling with that because I get the premise of that, right? As absent facts, people will make stuff up. But I also think there is a truth that leaders can over-communicate, because if you do communicate outside your expertise, or you communicate and you're making stuff up, or you're not being concise or factual, you can confuse people. What's been your experience with the wisdom that Joanna brought, obviously, on the fact that we need to communicate a lot? What's the right balance? Is there a right ratio of how often, how frequency? When should you say, you know what, maybe I should stop communicating for a bit?
Well, it's a great point you bring up. And as an organization, we recognize that over communication, if it starts to lead to inaccurate information, as you say, it can work against the very thing you're trying to do. We set up at the beginning of this pandemic a weekly meeting with all of our leaders so that we could be providing them accurate information. We've now just moved that to bi-weekly, still making sure that they're getting facts and data and the things that we don't know yet. They know to say that. We're not sure, but anticipate in 2 weeks we'll have some more answers as far as our, reopening up some of our offices, or as far as our consultants and our account executives starting to travel again. So I think as the senior level leader group, the importance of communicating actual factual information, and also reminding leaders all the time, if you don't know, because there's so many opinions on the news and the news is going 24 hours. If you don't know, it's important to remind them, don't be sharing that as well. So I would be careful in the balance of communicating too much or not communicating enough. I think it would be better to err on the side of communicating a little bit too much, just because of the separation and the anxiousness that all employees, including the leaders, are feeling right now. But to your very point, make sure what you're communicating is factual and not just your opinion or what you hope is going to happen or what you worry about is going to happen.
So Todd, I've watched you and the executive team make some very careful investments in FranklinCovey's culture the last 3 months. You mentioned we have a town hall about once a month now, or so, maybe a little less frequently. But we also have this weekly, or now sort of bi-monthly cadence with just leaders. What are the types of topics, skills, knowledge you transfer in these weekly, every 2 weeks or so, leader of people meetings?
Yes, well, I'm not here to pitch our books, but following, quite frankly, what we outlined in the most recent best-selling book, Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, the 6 critical practices for leading a team. These are really what we are following, because they are critical practices, not for leading a team just when things are going business as usual, but for always leading a team. One of those practices, for instance, is leading your team through change. And we had one of our expert, in fact, our senior vice president of our consultant group, use that content for one of these biweekly meetings, talking about the importance of recognizing and helping your team members recognize what area they're in through what we call the change model. What are they currently in the zone of disruption? Are they already moved on to the zone of adoption, to whatever this new normal turns out to be? And identifying where you're at as a leader and when they're at. That's one of the many things that we've been communicating with our leaders, is how important it is to recognize where you're at so that you can then lead your other team members through it. I've already mentioned the importance of holding regular one-on-ones, and what you say and what you communicate and what your intent is behind those one-on-ones. I read an article the other day that made reference to, we keep hearing the comment, well, we're all in this together. We are all in this together. This article talked about hearing someone say we're all in the same boat. And the author made such a great differentiation saying, we are not in the same boat.
Right.
We're all in the same storm, but we're all in different boats. Some of us have nice cruise liners. Some of us have broken down, rag ships. Others don't even have a boat. And I think it's so critical as leadership and as someone who's in a position to help coach leaders to remind them that everybody's not the same. This phrase, oh, I know how you feel. I cringe whenever I hear that. And I'm sure I've used that phrase before, but none of us knows exactly how the next person feels. Even someone who's in the same role or title that I have, we have a different set of circumstances. And I can't overemphasize that enough. Everyone is in a different boat. And we got to be mindful of that if we're going to be effective as their leader and as their coach.
Todd, one of the reasons why we had this multi-part interview today was to provide all of our millions of listeners and subscribers and viewers around the world some tips and ideas to draw upon the wisdom of our guests. Let's talk a bit about FranklinCovey's re-entry plan. Now, for those who may not be aware, our company is a public company. We're based here in Salt Lake City, Utah, but we have offices around the world. Some of them are company-owned and operated offices, and other of those are licensed and managed through partnerships. As it relates to the employees here at the corporate headquarters in Salt Lake City, what could you share with our viewers and listeners around some of the thought processes, systems, protocols that you're leading for the company as we kind of reopen the campus at some point? And what will it be like to work at FranklinCovey in the coming months and year ahead?
Great question. It's been, I won't say it's been surprising, but it's been very interesting for us during the last couple of months of this lockdown to see the productivity and the effectiveness of our various teams not drop at all and actually in many cases increase. So first and foremost, we're kind of rethinking who does need to be in an office, in a brick and mortar office. As you mentioned, we have consultants and we have account executives out around the world who have already been working from home offices and virtually for a long time. But we have this hub of 200 plus people in our corporate office here in Salt Lake that in most cases, if not all, have become actually more effective. And as I've been talking with them and checking in on them and their leaders and what's going on, the theme that I'm hearing from them as to why this productivity is increased is they have more balance in their lives. Now that sounds like an odd thing to talk about in a pretty stressful, chaotic time. But the fact that they are now working through their day in their home environment and they're determining more than they did before when they do what, their productivity is actually increased. So the level of trust, I guess I would say, that employers have with their employees is really being put to the test right now. Some industries and some employers think, well, unless I can see the person at their desk from 8 to 5, I don't know that they're working. Well, I think it's time to really evaluate what are we paying for, and what we're paying for are results. And do I care if you get that done between 8 and 5 or between noon and midnight or sporadically in between? I had 2 employees, and they're not in entry-level positions. I've had 2 employees so far come to me confidentially and say, hey, I don't know how to talk to my manager about this. I can take on more. I'd like some more tasks. I all of a sudden have some additional capacity that I didn't have before. And I'm sure some of that is their commute time, what their former commute time was. What a great thing. And the reason they didn't want to go to their boss is they didn't want her or him to be thinking, well, yeah, I've just been kind of slacking off, but now I'm ready to take on more. They've actually been surprised themselves that they actually have more capacity. So I think the whole way we're working, I was reading Mark Zuckerberg's and Twitter's, accounts of where they may change their whole approach to business and have many, if not all of their employees or different sections work from home. I think it's something as employers we should all be evaluating right now and asking first and foremost the question, what are we paying for? We're paying for results. And if this person can get this job done, it opens up this whole new world of recruiting from anywhere. And instead of having people live in very expensive parts of the world, to work for your company, they can maybe work remotely. So those are things that as an organization, we're thinking about right now. And we're working with our managers for them to have input on whether they think their teams would be better in the long run continuing to work from home. But for those who are returning to home, to get back to your question, we're going through things that were mentioned this morning from Joanna. We're going through, okay, what does it mean? How do we need to reconfigure the offices so that we have appropriate social distancing? How do people come in the building? What kinds of wellness checks we're going to be doing, from temperature measuring to, has there been anyone sick in the family, and how do we track through that? So we're answering all those. I could go over them, but you and I are getting dozens of emails on how those things work. And so we think we've got a very good plan in place for when those who we decide should return, do return to work. But again, the takeaway I'd like from viewers to think about in this question is, what are you paying for? What are the results you're paying for? And are we stuck in some old ways of thinking that has to be done at this desk from 8 to 5?
Todd, in addition to being our Chief People Officer, you are also an operational leader. You manage a large budget and processes, and employees lead them as well. Anything changed amongst your group in the people services team at FranklinCovey that might be replicable or maybe inspiring to listeners and viewers on things that you've challenged your own kind of paradigm around, or you've changed your mindset on in terms of how your team works?
Well, our CEO, Bob Whitman, has really led you and me and the rest of the executive team out on this. But I think a great and helpful result from this pandemic, and I'm assuming most businesses are going through this, it's time to reevaluate the true effectiveness of every part of your business. The last thing any CEO or any top leader in an organization wants to do is lay somebody off, or ask them to take a reduction in pay, or ask them to be furloughed without pay for a while, or things like that. And many are unfortunately in a position where they have to do that. And we may be in the future. We're fortunately not right now. But one thing that we have every person in the company, and certainly every leader, thinking about is, what discretionary spending do you have within your stewardship that if you didn't use that spending, if you didn't do that right now, would not damage the business or damage any of the great things that we do for our clients? And it really gets everybody thinking, especially when you say, put one of our employees' faces on that dollar before you spend it. And we've, for as long as I can remember, never had frivolous spending or things that, people had to say, oh gosh, I'm embarrassed to know that I was doing this. But we do have new ways of thinking about the business with the intent of saving jobs, of keeping this tremendous group of talented people we have here at FranklinCovey. And so I think a big takeaway for me, and that I would advise others, and we're learning from every day, is to really evaluate, am I stuck in an old way of doing things that's actually costing the company more money? And are there better ways to accomplish this same thing that don't cost as much, and we can therefore keep the great talent that we have on board?
Todd, Dr. Stephen R. Covey was a mentor and a friend of yours, the co-founder of our firm, the author of many books, including the seminal book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which just hit its 30th anniversary, was re-released this week with new insights from one of his sons, a friend of ours, Sean Covey. And this book has sold 40 million copies. It's going to have a resurgence in the coming weeks because of the re-release. As we both know, Dr. Covey passed away just shy of 8 years ago as a result of a head injury from a bicycle accident. Had that not happened, and had Dr. Covey still been here, and was coaching you, what do you think, channel Stephen Covey for us, what are some of the leadership insights, I mean that appropriately, channel Dr. Covey, what are some of the things
I'm not a medium, Scott.
What are some of the things that Dr. Covey would be reminding you of to remind all of our leaders of?
Well, I'm going to return to a theme that I started out with, and I don't mean to harp on this, except for I do, because I think nothing is more important. Two of his many, hundreds of famous thoughts and quotes come to mind right now. The first is, with people, fast is slow. He would say this often, with people, fast is slow. And what he meant about that was, in our effort to try and be efficient and to solve problems and decide how are we going to reopen and how are we going to take care of this and how are we going to do that, we want to move quickly. And yes, of course, we want to move quickly. But when you're dealing with people and you try and speed things up without taking time to gather their input, to hear them out, to understand their point of view, you're actually slowing the whole process down. So the first of the two would be, remember, with people, fast is slow. Slow down a little bit. And the second is within the same theme, and he said, the deepest need of the human heart is to be understood. And I'm back to this topic of empathy. Someone asked me in an interview the other day, which of the 7 habits is most important at this time? Well, that was a hard choice because they're all very relevant all the time, but specifically right now. But if forced to say you could only pick one, it would be habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. With all of the millions of opinions out there on, the political aspects of this virus, wearing masks, not wearing masks, everything that's going on, and we all have and get more steeped in our opinions. If we'll just pause for a minute and take time to truly understand the other person's point of view, as outlandish as it may seem to us, we will get much farther in developing and strengthening those relationships, and therefore moving our organizations and our teams forward. So the deepest need of the human heart is to be understood.
Todd, take a moment and kind of retrain us all on how we exercise our empathy muscle. We hear so much about, you can teach empathy, or can you teach empathy? What does empathy look, sound, and feel like when a leader, a parent, a son-in-law, a neighbor, a team member is actually demonstrating it with someone else in their life?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. It starts with your intent. If my intent is to, quote unquote, have empathy so that I can then convince you over to my way of thinking, you may as well stop there, because you're not going to be successful at truly empathizing with another person. But if my intent is really to understand you so that I can have a more civilized, pleasant, meaningful conversation with you, then that's the place to start. So check your intent first. And if my intent is to truly understand you without the goal of changing your mind, of getting you to agree with me, that's the first step. Once I'm there, and again, if I can't get there, then don't waste your time. But if I can get there and have that sincere intent, then this habit is truly executed by listening to the other person, listening to as best as you can, what are they feeling right now? Are they feeling anxious? Are they feeling excited? Are they feeling stressed? Are they feeling panicked? And then to acknowledge that and say, Scott, you seem pretty stressed about this. Right there, that's an empathic statement. You're not going on to then advise, you seem pretty stressed. Have you thought about calling this person? Have you thought about doing this? Resist that. Suspend, and Stephen Covey used that word a lot, and I love it. Suspend your feelings and your opinions long enough to truly understand the other person. Suspend doesn't mean throw out. Suspend doesn't mean give up on. Suspend means put your feelings and your emotions and your opinions aside so that I can truly say, Debbie, you seem really anxious about the change we're making. Am I understanding that correctly? You think about that person in your life, or those people hopefully in your life that really have empathic listening skills, and how you are just drawn to them whenever you really need to be understood. Who are you being that for? This is what I share with leaders every day. Are you being that for each of your team members? Because the sooner they can feel understood and they can get it out, then we can start productive, effective conversations to move forward.
Stephanie Miller would have given me an F- on this between about 7:50 and 10:15 last night, which I'm imagining a lot of marriages are going through right now, right? I don't imagine mine is the only. Todd, one final question, because when we have a chief people officer on the phone, it's always on the line through Zoom. It's always helpful to understand kind of policies. And what advice would you give the employee who needs a break? They need a vacation, but they're not going to board a plane to Rome or to Fort Myers, but they're scared about their job, and they're not wondering if their job's going to be safe and if they can actually take a vacation. I don't know anybody who's working less. I mean, my personal life ceased to exist 10 weeks ago. Any broad advice you would give to people on how to make sure that they're balancing, take some time off, take a vacation, versus being paranoid that you're going to lose your job if you're able to do that?
Yes, well, we're pretty big on planning here at FranklinCovey. As you know, one of our founding solutions was around time quest and time management and the Franklin Planner, and that is not lost. That is still very much a part of our culture and a part of each of our solutions. And as I've talked with people, both in our company, outside of our company, one of the things that they're really struggling with is keeping a schedule, because their schedule is now kind of whatever they want it to be within reason.
Right.
And that part sounds good, but back to when they used to report into an office, they would, in most cases, and in our company, they would plan out their week on a Sunday night, map out what they needed to do. I would encourage people to continue to do that, because as you do that and you look at your schedule, even though your commute is now from your bedroom to your office, your home, if you're lucky, if you have a home office, but if you plan out that schedule in that week, you can visually look at it and say, wow, I've kind of forgotten that, maybe eating lunch while I'm doing these meetings isn't a great thing. Am I breaking out for lunch? And should I go take an hour in the afternoon and go walk with my partner or my spouse or my dog or all three of, and so I think visually looking at your week and, okay, I intended to do this, but now it's been 2 weeks and I still haven't blocked out time to do X or Y. So I think that has been, for myself and those that I've been working with, the most helpful, to visually map out. Don't stop your planning. Don't stop being structured that way. And in that structure, make sure, to the very things that you mentioned, make sure I'm blocking out time for that, or I'm going to burn out and my team's going to burn out.
So Todd, I'll be on vacation for the next 10 days. Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. We are all in the same storm. We are not all in the same boat. Todd Davis, FranklinCovey's Chief People Officer, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Scott.